Hello, everyone, and welcome to this BOF live event. My name is Sophie Soar. I'm the commercial features editor at the Business of Fashion. And over the next 45 minutes, we are going to dive into how fashion and beauty brands can better leverage their presence on TikTok to strategically engage the platform's community that exceeds 1 billion individuals. To unpack this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by Farah Maloof, who is head of fashion and luxury partnerships at TikTok. Thanks for joining us today, Farah.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we also have with us today Jordan Mitchell, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of Good Culture Inc., a cultural marketing agency that works with brands like Marc Jacobs, Good American, Speedo, Alo Yoga, Creed, and many more besides that. Pleasure to have you with us, Jordan.
Thanks for having me.
So just some quick housekeeping before we get going. For this session today, we're going to dive into themes ranging from how to engage the zeitgeist as shaped by TikTok to working with content creators and then optimizing operations to most effectively navigate TikTok. Should you wish to dive into this topic in more detail, do check out the 20-page report we recently published on BOF in partnership with TikTok called Commercializing the Zeitgeist, Crafting a Successful TikTok Strategy, which is on businessoffashion.com. We have a lot to get through today and only about 45 minutes. And I, of course, have all of my questions for Farah and Jordan, but we have also received dozens and dozens of questions ahead of this session from you, our audience. So I shall be posing some of these to our panelists as we go throughout. So to begin with, we're going to start with unpacking TikTok and the zeitgeist. So Farah, I'm going to come to you first by way of an introduction. I'd really like to start by asking you, how has TikTok as a platform really come to inform and shape the cultural zeitgeist as we know it today? And what impact has this in turn had on creative industries like fashion and beauty?
Sure. So I think the scale and influence of TikTok are really undeniable. And it's definitely shaped both the fashion and beauty industries, among many other industries, but obviously these are our two favorites for everyone here today. In terms of scale, you said there are 1 billion worldwide users, and we have over 170 million monthly active users just alone in the US. So the sheer scale is something that really has helped shape the zeitgeist. I think also the influence, right? I think we talk about democratization a lot. It's really been a buzzword for such a long time, but I really believe that TikTok is one of those platforms where you can have the microphone as an everyday person. I think also if you just look at your FYP or For You page, there's this crazy range of content. There's like anything and everything. And it reflects this intersectionality and these interests of so many diverse communities that all choose to make TikTok their home. And I think all of the different creators and communities that are on this platform understand that they have this influence and really take this opportunity on TikTok to steer different cultural conversations. And in turn, this has really had a business impact, I think, especially in the fashion and beauty communities, because people in these communities, they aren't just bystanders or not just consuming the content. They're really, really active participants. They're part of the conversation, whether it's commenting on a brand they like or creating their own content about brands that they love, products that they love, creators that they align with, and are really truly engaged there. I think the other factors surrounding these behaviors are, it's then this like whole context and ecosystem where brands can really have a role in their marketing and be part of these conversations. So it's like a UGC community-driven environment where then brands can find this place where there's already amazing conversation about them. Two of my favorite stats for this, because I have to throw some stats in. After viewing TikTok first creative on a platform, 83% of users said they trust a brand on TikTok, right? So it's like that ability to engage really changes, I think, what the perspective and marketplace is for pure advertising on a platform, especially when we're in this media landscape where it's so saturated, so penetrated, harder than ever to really show up. And to show up on a platform where ads are welcome and you can be part of the community and part of the conversation makes ads really, truly more organically part of the culture again.
Yeah, and a lot of what you've just been mentioning then as well is about, obviously with the sheer size and the sheer speed at which everything changes on TikTok, it does very much driven by that active participation of the community as well as the brands engaged in it. It does mean that its role in shaping the zeitgeist is happening all the time. And as a result, brands, marketeers, they have to be constantly switched on, constantly recognizing what is a trend, what's going to land, what's going to resonate with wider audiences. Jordan, it's actually something that you previously said to me for the white paper that I mentioned earlier, which was that these brands really need to get at these trends when they're at their ember, right at the start, before they're about to spread. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you recommend brands track and monitor the zeitgeist as it is changing and as it is created at such speed, just to really get ahead of the trends before they peak.
Yeah, I mean, I think central to that is actually people engaging with the platform. There's no shortcut to being able to track or understand what's happening in culture if you don't have a team that's culturally engaged. So there are obviously platforms and social listening tools like Creator IQ, which we use, but actually we strategically hire and work with individuals within the business who are active on the platform, who are using it, who when we have our weekly catch-ups as a team and we're going to talking about what's happening in culture, they're telling us what's on their For You page. And that's actually how we start to understand what the sort of trends are. And because TikTok as a platform is so nuanced and I guess skewed to your own interests and your own algorithm, the more diverse teams that you have, the different points of view, the different voices, allows you to kind of capture the embers of trends that are coming up in different pockets of spaces, which then you can then feed through to your clients. So I think actually investing in having teams who are culturally switched on and engaged is central to all of this. You can't fake it.
That also, though, very much brings into the idea of having large teams who can stay on top of all of these. And it also speaks to the issue that some companies don't necessarily have that kind of infrastructure. They may be incredibly small brands, or they may not have necessarily the resources or the backing from within their own business to put the resources into being able to keep track of what is changing on the platform at speed. So just sticking with you a second here, Jordan, what would you recommend in terms of those who are potentially seeing a trend that has already happened? Maybe they feel like they've slightly missed it. Do you recommend engaging anyway, or should they hold back?
I think for me, and what our kind of strategy across kind of all content for our clients is, if you're going to be participating in something, is it authentic to you and your audience? And if it is authentic to you and your audience, irrespective of kind of time, obviously you don't want to be kind of late to the party, but equally, if it really resonates and chimes with your brand values and what you stand for, it's an evergreen conversation. You just reimagine it in different ways. So I think that the most critical point is you don't have to be involved in every trend. If you're the white company having a Brat Girl summer, it's not going to land because it doesn't make sense. It's a jarring kind of sort of juxtaposition. So I think it's just about being authentic to your audience and actually spending your time and resource getting to know and getting to understand your audience, listening to them, and then engaging in conversation with what's already happening within your community. And anything else is a bonus.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a reaction as well. Like your community will tell you if they're interested in your content. I think a great example of this is Loewe, for instance, a brand that we see always performing incredibly well, who tend to post content that is very much jumping on emerging niche trends, like the faces trend that's only been coming out the last couple of days, and the way that they've reimagined that with their puzzle bag, which has had a mix of reviews from like, what is this, for people who don't know the trend coming out, to those who are like, your marketing team is absolutely genius. I wondered, a question that's also come from loads of people in our audience today for both of you is, what other brands you believe are really excelling at engaging with the zeitgeist today, and why? Perhaps Farah will come to you first, and then Jordan will come to you afterwards.
Well, Jordan and I know have one shared answer. So, and probably what a lot of people would think of on the line too. I think Marc Jacobs is doing a really incredible job. They're so engaged with all of these niche communities, and they're an example of, I think, the extreme end of jumping on these really viral trends and engaging with really niche creators in a super exciting way. And then I also love how Coach has come to life on the platform. I think my favorite aspect of how they engage in the zeitgeist is they're in the comment section. I'm one of those girlies who's always in the comment section first. Like, that's my spot. I want to see what people are saying. And I find it very charming, funny, and really giving the brand coach a personality with the way they engage in the comments. And I just I love those two and what they're doing and how you can really truly see the personality of the brand in a new and different way.
And Jordan?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Marc Jacobs, we've got a shared love for, and I think again, it's about being authentic. You know, they are jumping on different trends, but actually at the center of it, there is that sort of commonality on it really aligns with the kind of personality of the brand versus them just doing something that feels really random and kind of out of the blue. I think Jacquemus also doing really great things. Refi, Road. For me, I guess a good idea or a good strategy for a brand is really just centering community as well. And all of those brands, the red thread is really that they're playing to their community. It's almost like that in joke. It's like if you could imagine what the messages they're sending to each other directly, it's almost like a sort of visual manifestation of just what's going on in their mind, in the same way we would share messages with our pals. So I think it's kind of bringing everyone into their world, but also being part of their actual community.
Absolutely. There's lots of people in the chat at the moment who are sharing some of the examples that they also believe are doing particularly well from a brand perspective. So I would love to encourage you all to continue sharing. We've had Xenia, Ferragamo, Jacquemus, Loewe all mentioned. So please do continue to share. A word that's just come up there multiple times is community. And it's also a question that's come through from somebody in our audience because the aim is often to keep audiences engaged in content and hopefully eventually obviously convert into a consumer. But that requires not just entertaining users and the community, but it also involves building a community and building loyalty as well. So the audience question that came through is from Lena Vasquez, who has asked how brands can build a loyal community on TikTok rather than just aiming for viral moments. And I wondered what your recommendations would be for that. Jordan, perhaps we'll come to you.
I just put myself on mute, guys, because I was having an email shatter. So we've sorted that out. God, I think for me, and this might slightly go not against what we're talking about, but community doesn't work in a silo. It's not kind of one singular sort of thing that you look to do. It's the combination of what you're doing online and what you're doing offline. But I think the primary sort of builder in community is actually just having that dialogue with your audience, like showing up in the spaces that matter to them as well, and really understanding sort of the need states of your audience. So for us, you know, when we're working with our brands, we're listening to the community first, and then we're mirroring back to them. So for instance, on one hand, we work with Barber. Nature Talk is a big deal for those guys because guess what? Like the jacket thrives in those kind of environments. And so we think about kind of telling stories that really sit well with that audience, whereas perhaps for Marc Jacobs, it's a slightly different approach and strategy. So I think it's centering in your audience first and then laddering back from there.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned obviously about those communities that are evolving around sort of the subcultures and the talks, as you say, whether it's nature talk, whether it's book talk, whether it's garden talk, dad talk, you know, all these different kind of areas. Is there anything further that you would add to that as well, Farah, around building a loyal community on TikTok and your advice?
Yeah, I think it harkens back to what both of you said. And it's really, how do you not just tap into culture, but how do you really contribute to the culture? What does it mean to participate? Like what Jordan said before, what is the right value for your brand, and how does your brand add value to that community? Because I think that relevancy and authenticity to the brand is what's really going to drive loyalty from the community on TikTok.
Absolutely. So next up, we're going to think about content creators, which are obviously the lifeblood of the platform, very much so. And I'd like to start by thinking, Jordan, sort of a broader question for you, I suppose. Why is working with content creators such a valuable tool in a brand's arsenal on TikTok?
I mean, for us, and you know, at Good Culture, we represent, you know, talent, and now in a way, talent have also become content creators. And I think what is really valuable is that you are able to authentically have a direct line to their audience, to their community, to their world. And that talent and content creators are almost the sort of personality archetype and the visual manifestation of your brand, particularly for brands that don't have, like a face. So, with Jacquemus, you've got Simon and you've got all of these wonderful characters that you can roll out to sort of build and breathe life into your brand. But if you're a brand that doesn't have a kind of main protagonist or a main person, your content creators almost become that extension of your brand values and what you stand for and the personality and how they show up. So yeah, I mean, tapping into different audiences, amplifying brand messages and value, and also being able to leverage their reach and their point of view. If you're engaging with content creators that really stand for something and that actually, whether it is NASA on one side, where it's kind of that trad life movement, or it could be a Jamila Jamil on the other, who's got something, really additive to be putting into the cultural kind of dialogue. By aligning with different individuals, you get to extend what your own values are and access new conversations.
And Farah, I think something that it really stood out as well in the white paper too, which is that over 60% of users agree that TikTok creators actually make them more interested in trying new products too. So actually aligning with whether, as you say, it's an Nara, it's a Jamil, whether it's one or the other, when you're engaging in these communities, you can really help be able to encourage more engagement in a product, in a brand. But what I wanted to ask you, Farah, is what is your recommended approach then for brands in working with the right content creators on the platform today for maximum impact?
Yeah, and I love that you shared my favorite stat because I had it pulled up to share. So thank you. I think you have to bring creators in early and then build relationships with them, right? I know this sounds cliche to say, but I think authenticity is really key. I also think that you have to trust creators to do what they do best, and really work to co-create with them. Like, think of them as your creative director, think of them as your subject matter expert, think of them as the most talented storyteller you've ever met. Like, think of them as these huge authorities within their communities. And then as the brand, give them permission to show up in new contexts and really unexpected ways for your brand within those communities. And I think that part of that is building relationships with people who are genuine and authentic to the brand. I think the other part of it is that trust and really like briefing them early and then figuring out what the best approach for them is to show up on the platform. For one brand recently, we engaged with a creator who does great, funny green screen read reviews of products. And it's like, you're going to want to brief that creator to do a green screen review. You're not going to say, oh, go do like a full fashion shoot look for me on Crosby Street in Soho, right? Like, you really want it to be authentic. You have to build that trust their authority and sense of what's going to resonate with their community, and let them roll with it. And I think try and build long-term relationships, right? Collaborate on long-term content strategies, and then have that be part of your ecosystem for your brand and your community for your brand on the platform.
A really nice example, I think, actually, that we reference in the white paper too was, I think it was Gucci working with Amelia de Moldenberg when she was doing interviews around it, and really allowing her to do it in her own style that is what resonates with her audience as well. However, Farah, not everyone can afford to work with the likes of, Amelia de Moldenberg or Nara Smith of this world. And I wondered what other ways brands with smaller budgets can go about working with content creators on the platform, doing so in as cost-effective manner as possible.
Yeah, I think there are two things, right? I think the joy of TikTok, because it's a content graph, not a social graph. If you want to find people in niche communities, there are creators that are not as cost prohibitive as some of these big well-known names that you can go find that align with your brand to work with. And one of my favorite tools, I've used this tool even since before I worked at TikTok in my last job, and it's really evolved and gotten so good, is the Creator Marketplace tool, which is part of TikTok One. And it's really helped people optimize how they find creators and how they do their campaigns. And you can do it at scale. You can work with up to 30 creators at a time, which is amazing. And it has a really streamlined workflow. So you can discover creators, invite creators, negotiate your pricing, fully customize campaigns, find ways to amplify the partnerships. this gives you like that scaled quality creative that you need. It's a great always on marketing approach. And then you also have different analytics on the creators that you've worked with. So I think that's my favorite entree point into working with creators at scale for TikTok.
And something, oh, sorry, no, carry on, Jordan.
I was going to say, we've also found that we work with clients across a range of different budgets. And actually, when we engage with the creators who have got smaller reach or smaller following, you actually get a higher level of engagement anyway, because their community is really hyper engaged in what they've got to say and the stories they have to tell. And also the value of TikTok, as you know, Farah, is the fact that, you know, you don't have to follow everyone. You can get exposed to any of the creators, unlike many other platforms where perhaps, you know, you're only inheriting their certain reach. Actually, with TikTok, you are exposed to sort of significant reach based on the algorithm that can kind of bring people into your feed that wouldn't be in there ordinarily. So yeah.
Jordan, just building on that point, however, is some of these content creators who maybe have much smaller audiences, they have in some instances risen to fame in a very short space of time.
Yeah.
And then they are facing completely unexpected challenges and opportunities and being able to suddenly work with some of these incredible brands. I think Jules LeBron is from the very demure, very mindful trend, is a great example of someone who suddenly found themselves facing multiple people vying to trademark her phrase within days of it going viral, which I can't imagine what that must be like as an experience. Is there anything that brands and businesses should be mindful of if they are approaching talent who is newer to the space and suddenly finding themselves thrust into the limelight, essentially? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, that in that instance with Jules, I think that was kind of unprecedented for her, in the sense that it just kind of came out of nowhere and you know, had incredible success. I think as a brand, you know, your job is really about identifying people that, you know, speak to your values, that you can align with, that make sense for your project and campaign. If it blows up, I think it's just about staying true on the journey with that individual and you know, finding ways to collaborate. But I think more, and I'm thinking more from a talent point of view, to be honest, because I guess the brand's responsibility can only kind of go so far, in the sense that they've done a campaign and an activation, and then, you know, it's gone viral, they're happy. But I think for the talent, and perhaps this is where the platform comes in, it's kind of nurturing those individuals on that journey, because it's kind of then what happens thereafter. If their stock currency goes up, how do they negotiate better deals for themselves? You know, how do they protect their own IP? And I guess that's where agencies like Good Culture, where we represent individuals, kind of come into play, because then we can help map out that longer term strategy. So I think brands can only be involved in that journey to an extent, and then it's kind of I guess getting the right team in place to manage the newfound fame and success thereafter.
Absolutely. And thinking about newfound fame as success and going from 0 to 100, one of the questions that actually came in from somebody in our audience, apologies if I mispronounce your name, but I think it's Larizia Roman, has asked how it is that you can grow your brand organically from 0, by which I'm going to translate this as, for those who don't have any presence on TikTok at all at the moment, where should they start? Is content creators, for example, a good place to start and working with them? Farah, perhaps I can come to you for this and what you would necessarily recommend for somebody brand new to the platform.
Yeah, and I think obviously TikTok's a great place to launch a brand organically. We have such an amazing audience and so many people who could be your future shoppers for your brand. I think the key is to really come with a test and learn mindset, right? I think be open to experimenting. TikTok is a great place because there's no pressure to be super polished. There's no pressure to be perfect on the platform. I think like even talking about Jules LeBron, you're like, this isn't perfect polished content. This is someone creating a piece of content in their car on their way to work, right? So it doesn't have to be a full studio production or a really polished institutional asset to try what works. And I think this is also an environment where you're really rewarded for experimentation and creative bravery, right? There's so many different ways to really engage and tell your story. So I think like, think of what's right for your brand. You could do it on your own. You could work with creators. Think about what storytelling is right And then be consistent in making content and be consistent in engaging with the audience. And then in your account, you have organic analytics tools that will tell you what's working and what's not. So you can continue to build on that strategy. And then I think figuring out what works and amplifying it even more with a little bit of paid, and then going into the analytics of that business account and figuring out how you can really truly scale. And then, going back to the ability to use tools like TikTok, Creator Marketplace for figuring out who can be really good brand advocates for you, because there are people who are opting in from small sizes to big sizes who are really great natural storytellers who can help you find your stride as you launch.
Yeah. A nice point that you mentioned there as well is the fact that you don't need big budgets to make this kind of content. And actually, it's often quite nice to have the complementary, potentially quite high production, high cost content that you'd be producing anyway, alongside lo-fi content. And it's something that Coach spoke about, the VP of North American Marketing spoke for the white paper as well, and gave that example of paying for advertising, which may be that glossier campaign, and alongside running campaigns that may be that more lo-fi content, working with content creators and posting it across their channels, as well as the brand's own channels as well, and how impactful that can be. Is there anything that you would add as well, Jordan, in terms of that sort of content type, content style that people should be looking at and working with, potentially with lower budgets?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Farah, you kind of mentioned this earlier around when you're identifying content creators, if someone's doing content behind a green screen, there's no point in asking them to do something that's kind of a bit more fashion focused. And so it's actually just being really intentional about who you're going after and making sure that what you're asking them to do just aligns with the content that they're already doing. So if it's quite sort of, lo-fi, scrappier, and that's the energy you want to go for, then lean into that versus, trying to get them to do something that sits outside of their comfort level.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite quotes, I think, from the white paper came from actually somebody at TikTok who said very much that you can identify your brand voice by thinking about who they would be after a glass of champagne. I think they said sip of champagne, glass of champagne, which I think is a lovely idea in knowing who that might come across as. Maybe they're a bit wittier, maybe they're a bit more serious, whatever it might be, and running with that. I think it's fantastic. I want to start thinking now a little bit more about operational optimization. We've been thinking about content opportunities and optimization, and now I want to think a little bit more about, outside of just working on the platform, what you should be looking at internally. And it's already something that you've touched upon already, Jordan, about, who it is you should be potentially hiring within your teams. But obviously, there's also an aspect about removing barriers to sign off. That's going to be critical to enable marketers to react with speed. And obviously, being able to engage in the zeitgeist and on TikTok is all about speed. But the practicalities of this can be quite challenging, especially if there are layers and layers of sign off. It's something that actually Elf Beauty's CMO mentioned for the white paper as well, which was that organizations need to remove obstacles that slow things down. Then you're able to move in tandem with your community. So, Jordan, what must brands consider when they are optimizing internally for excellence on TikTok? How would you recommend approaching this?
Well, I think you have to set parameters up front. So before you're even thinking about a campaign or getting into sort of responding to a sort of viral trend, it's about actually briefing your team so they know what the parameters are. So with us, we will set kind of what our non-negotiables are. So each brand will have a different point of view, a different tone of voice, different comfort levels. For instance, if we're working with Courvoisier, it's an alcohol brand, there's so many different guidelines that we have to consider before we even put anything out into the world, versus Marc Jacobs, which is a lot more agile. So it's getting your lens, like who are your customers, what's your audience, what's the aesthetic, what's the tone of voice, getting the parameters, what are your non-negotiables, what comments and what conversations are you comfortable participating, what are you not. We've had to do that with Tommy Tippy, for instance, which is it's not fashion, it's not beauty, but it's mother care, life care, parent care, and with that there's certain guardrails in place. So once you understand understand and you've kind of got almost your toolkit in place of the sort of the territory and the comfort level and the, I guess, the appetite for risk with your clients, it becomes a lot more easier to then know what you can and can't respond to. Also, in a really practical way, we have WhatsApp groups dedicated to just quick sign off. So we have all of the key decision makers. And, you know, if we see something in real time, or if we need content that needs to be signed off to get it out there, we'll have live groups where it's like, you know, we sign it off pretty quickly and just get it done. And we reduce the amount of people that are in that sign-off process. So typically, you know, we'll only be working from a client side. There will be 2 people that would be in that decision-making process, and that's it, versus layers and layers and layers, is kind of how we approach things.
And obviously, you know, having worked with brands for years, TikTok has responded to the demand that people are putting out there for support in optimizing their operations for marketeers. You know, like, yes, you can try and make these changes internally, but it's also incredibly beneficial to be given tools that will help people make decisions and being told what works best. Farah, what kind of tools? Obviously, you've mentioned a couple of them already, but are there any other tools that you would think are valuable to mention now that are available to brands to leverage for added support for their teams when they're working with new and emerging content and trends?
Yeah, for sure. I have some faves. Obviously, the first one's the TikTok app. It's such a rich source of inspiration. Every marketer should be on there. They should be following fashion brands, beauty brands, creators, and see what excites you as an individual, like as a marketer, and say, how can I reimagine this for my brand? Right? I think there's so many different inroads, different formats of storytelling. There's really so much inspiration there that you need to be on there. I have 2 accounts, one that's just more work things and one that's more personal. So I get a little bit of variation in the algorithm because it is so personalized. The other thing I love, love, love is the TikTok Creative Center. So if you just Google TikTok Creative Center, it'll take you there. It's free. It's accessible to anyone. And it really helps brands see what's emerging on the platform. So you can see all of the relevant trends, and have access to the commercial music library. It'll also give you examples of content, hashtags, other ads that are in that same category. And it really helps you elevate your content in a way that to me is just like remarkably so fast and so easy. And we have a lot of innovations coming in the AI space in TikTok Symphony that help you really elevate your content. Think about different ways to drive efficiency with AI, whether it's making your ad creatives more beautiful, more easily and more quickly. We also have a scripting creative assistant that can even help you write a script for TikTok, and help, you know, like get your creative teams started on different ideas, your copywriting team started on different ideas. And I think it makes these things that are normally complex simple. Like they make it just like a bit easier to get started. It makes some tasks feel like not as onerous because you have this great starting point of a trend example from Creative Center, or a script that you could start and then use that as your first draft to then like evolve into something else for a final draft from the TikTok Symphony suite.
That's really interesting, actually, because obviously generative AI is very much, and AI more generally, is very much set to help automate processes and speed up the creative process, whether that's utilizing it as a springboard for ideas or actually creating your content as well from scratch. And obviously, trying to get sign off sometimes on teams' time and putting their energy into something can be quite challenging to prove the ROI, to prove the point and the purpose of using teams' time in that, which can sometimes make it quite difficult to align around. So presumably that's also quite helpful too, to be able to speed up that process and speed up that sign off. And I kind of wanted to bring that round to then thinking about different KPIs that teams are going to think about for their performance on TikTok. In the white paper, and we've also spoken about Coach already, they very much said that their content is about driving purchase intent. For Elf, it's about building community. They're very different ideas. And it's always quite difficult to track performance, to track KPIs for brand marketing. That can be really challenging, especially if it's about demonstrating ROI when applying resources in this space. This is a very long-winded way of leading up to the next audience question, which is from Astoka Sarah, who has been asking about translating traffic into revenue. And I want to reframe that question and think about what kind of conversation marketers should be having within their businesses to try and validate efforts and expenditure in this area, to very much prove the use case and the benefit of brand marketing efforts in this area. Jordan, perhaps I can come to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we get asked this all the time. We have a number of metrics, and like you say, depending on the brand, it's measured very differently. But I think the universal theme that we work with is kind of SMV, which is a kind of mixture of the engagement, comments, and overall reach of said post. But also we try to educate our brands about the idea of shifting this mindset from kind of advertising spend to cultural investment. And if you are being additive to a cultural narrative, and if you're being additive to your community, in fact, that is investment that might not necessarily yield immediate results, but actually what you're doing is driving a longer term strategy. And so we are, and kind of to my earlier point about nothing works in silos, and that actually, whilst TikTok strategy is a huge part of the work that we do, it's part of a wider ecosystem, and you have to look at it existing as part of a wider ecosystem. And so you will measure success of a campaign holistically, with TikTok being a very vital part of that. But if you're looking at things in silo, you're going to feel disappointed, because you're not always going to get that viral sellout moment. It's going to be part of a longer and wider trajectory.
And of course, there is now the opportunity to buy through TikTok. We have TikTok Shop. There's a shoppable ecosystem. I believe, for instance, you mentioned Tommy Tippy earlier as an example. You've worked with Suki Waterhouse on that campaign. You were able to buy it through TikTok to get those products. It's a lovely way in which you can tie all of these different points together. And we have seen such a rapid uptake of TikTok Shop since its introduction in mid-2023. I believe it's now, as of June 2024, TikTok Shop has become the 9th largest beauty and wellness e-commerce retailer in the US. I think it's the 2nd largest in the UK, according to data from Dash Hudson and Nielsen IQ. So I wanted to know a little bit about the uptake and the effective use cases that you have seen from TikTok Shop and from brands, and how they can use it to the best of their advantage. I don't know who would like to start.
I think Farah would be fab for this one.
I'm curious to hear Jordan's perspective too.
At the minute, I would say that it's still a relatively nascent kind of platform, or part of the platform for some of our brands. And so we're still bringing them on the journeys. Brands like Tommy Tippy, I think for them, it feels a lot more, it makes a lot more sense to their sort of ecosystem and the way that they work. And I think it works really well for beauty. But I think with the fashion side of things, it's going to be a journey. And I know that, people will adopt. But as you know, so many of these brands can be quite late adopters. So I think they're going to, it's going to take some time, certainly from my clients. But Farah, hopefully you can help me get them up to speed.
Yeah, I think it's been an amazing journey. We just had 2 of our favorite brands, Crocs and Hey Dude, launch on TikTok Shop with great success, right? I think they really view it as a thoughtful, holistic as part of a thoughtful, holistic omni-channel strategy. And I think like the joy of TikTok Shop is its discovery, its e-com, and how can you really capture demand and simultaneously create this fun, positive experience for shoppers that's still within the TikTok apps. I think that's really the opportunity, and we're excited to get even more brands live on TikTok Shop for these bigger brands, especially in 2025.
You mentioned there as well about, Jordan, the sort of slower adoption, I suppose, and trying to get people up to speed a little bit more. And Farah, presumably you're working very closely with working in fashion and luxury businesses to try and encourage with that adoption too. And I wondered as well, there's a question that came through from somebody in our audience. Adebayo has asked specifically about how might brands in the luxury market sell or position their higher priced items on TikTok. I wondered if you could speak a bit to that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely audience for higher priced point objects. I think there's a little myth busting to do that TikTok is just a Gen Z audience. The audience is obviously aged up and they have a ton of buying power. It's an exciting place, I think, to position higher price point items to, say, millennial and Gen X audiences, because they are on the platform and they're definitely looking for trends. And they love to be introduced to new products by ads. So I think like get out there, use that test and learn approach and do that targeting. So you're reaching your target audience that has the buying power for your high price point product.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that as well, you mentioned around the myth busting aspect there, which is that if you can confirm it, the average age of TikTok users is actually over the age of 30. Am I right in thinking?
I have to pull it for you for the moment, but we've definitely aged up as we've scaled, right? Especially in the US, where we're now over 179 million users, is over half the US population. So it's obviously not just Gen Z anymore with that level of scale.
Definitely not. Wonderful. In the last few minutes of our conversation, I'm just going to pose to you and one more question from our audience that came through in advance, which is very much thinking about the fact that over the years, we've obviously seen, very much driven by the way in which users are working with and engaging with TikTok. Content formats changing, they've shortened. There's a demand for shoppable content, which obviously there has been an evolution towards. There's the increasing use of TikTok, ads and engaging with advertising, but also trying to capture attention because apparently users lose their attention for their active attention in advertising after 1.3 seconds. So it's all about, constantly evolving content to continue to hook people and draw people in and keep them engaged. And a question that has come through from Michelle in our audience has asked, what trends or shifts in TikTok's user behavior do you foresee for 2025? And how should brands begin preparing to stay ahead? I don't know who would like to start. Maybe Jordan, we can start with you.
I think that the one thing you can guarantee about TikTok and social trends is that you don't always know what's going to happen. I think that, some of the biggest moments in culture that have happened this year, you just couldn't predict it. And so for me, and this is again the way that we work, it's about just staying rooted in what your values are, and then staying engaged, staying curious, being using the platform, working with people who are kind of using the platform, building out your community. So if you're working with influencers, work with individuals who are shaping the trends, and therefore by virtue you're going to be part of that journey. But yeah, I think for me, being too prescriptive, being too rigid with your plans is you're not setting yourself up for success, because the whole point of TikTok is the agility and the ability to respond and switch it up in real time.
Absolutely. Farah, would you add anything additional to that?
Yeah, so we have a whole team that works on this. They're actually one of my favorite teams because I think they have one of the most interesting jobs, because they get to just go into uncovering all of the trends on the platform that are coming right from our communities and how they're reflecting and shaping culture. And they're really always on the lookout for what's new and trending in terms of where users are engaging, where brands are engaging, what are the latest cultural moments. So I have a more tactical takeaway from that team to share, because we asked them for kind of a sneak peek in terms of insights for what are some trends they're seeing emerging recently. I think one of them actually goes back to the last question from one of the viewers on what is a way to get some of my high price point products out there on TikTok. And one of the trends we're seeing is buy it for life. So it's been a really popular trend where creators, communities are coming out with these curated shopping lists, or what are the things they want to splurge on, right? What are these the this is kind of my holy grail, beautiful splurge item that I want to have forever. So I think that's a great opportunity too, if you have a price point, kind of like lifetime special splurge product, to partner with creators and like get your brand in the mix with that trend. And I think the other one that's really sweet coming up towards the holiday is tradition setting, right? So like, what are those different global traditions that you might not know about, whether it's like hiding a pickle ornament in your Christmas tree, or surprising your partner with like a gift that's $20 that you have to get within 10 miles. There are all of these fun trends that explode on the platform that are so sweet and genuine, and ways you're learning about different communities, different cultures. And I think they're really an opportunity for brands to dig in and, be part of these maybe old or newly forming traditions, depending on where your brand can find a good fit.
Fantastic. Thank you for that insight there. That's great to know.
They're so fun.
Yeah, so it sounds like such a fun team to work in.
Yeah.
As a final question for you both then, I just want to leave everybody in our audience with a final thought, because obviously we have covered so much in this session, and there is so much more besides that we could have continued to dive into. So as a final thought, I just would like to ask both of you to pull out one key learning, potentially from what we've already spoken about, unless there's anything additional that you want to add, that for our audience, if they're going to remember anything from this session on how brands can increase their presence and impact on TikTok, what would that be? Jordan, why don't we come to you first?
Would just say focus on cultural alignment rather than exploiting trends. I genuinely feel like at the core of the way that I work, and certainly the clients work, it's just about authenticity and showing up in spaces that are genuinely authentic to you. And I think that that's okay. You don't have to be on every trend. You just need to be authentic and be value led. And that's just, that's how I see things.
Thank you. And Farah, the last word to you.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Jordan. I think my takeaway would be bring in creators early, trust them, and build relationships with them.
Amazing. Succinct, to the point. Fantastic. Wonderful. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much, Farah and Jordan, for your time. And thank you so much to our audience as well for diving in. To learn more about this topic, please do read BOF and TikTok's white paper on commercializing the zeitgeist, crafting a successful TikTok strategy, which is a 20-page report designed to equip the international fashion, luxury, and beauty industries with strategic insight on executing effective TikTok strategies.